Welcome to Intergalactic Tarboush, eclectic conversations from the MENA with Iyad al-Baghdadi and me, Ahmed Gatnash. We talk about politics, activism, tech, spirituality, mental health, and more.
Hey man, what's up?
So tell me about futurism. How do you actually define it?
Futurism. Well, you see, I've been to start the story from the beginning. I live alone. Security matters, etc., etc. So I live alone, and it has an advantage, which is that I can be blasting kind of podcasts and documentaries and stuff as I do whatever. Like while I'm cooking, while I'm working out, while I'm basically hanging out, I'm always listening to content, right? So one of my favorite times to do this is in the morning when I'm cooking and eating. I do one meal a day, so that's basically my meal for the day, and normally all in it's basically an hour. So you can watch a good sized a medium sized documentary, right? So today I was watching something about attitudes towards the future, right? And how in the 1940s, 20th century, mid 20th century, there was this attitude of optimism towards the future. And how this continued into the 1960s, 1970s. This is, of course, the person who did this, who was speaking, was American, and I think he was talking mainly within the American and maybe the Anglosphere. And then he mentions how towards the 1990s, 2000s, this is replaced with a sense of pessimism towards the future. Almost like even young people, when you ask them about the future, what comes to their mind, even culturally speaking, is more dystopia. He comments, for example, about how, look at the popular stuff that we're watching today, like even young people are watching, right? We're talking about Black Mirror, Hunger Games, most recently Squid Games.
It's the zeitgeist of the last decade.
So the idea is it's not only old people who are kind of disillusioned, it's also young people. Imagine, what does it say about our point of history that young people are thinking about the future in dystopian terms? Of course, there's a whole analysis over there, but then, the whole idea is that, of course, that we are building an organization which is obsessed with the future. And futurism is something that we talk about all the time. The idea that sustainability, long-term futures, 20-year plans and strategy and stuff like that. But the curious thought that came to me this morning was how, what is the connection between futurism, even having an attitude towards the future, be it optimistic, pessimistic, etc., and modernity. And that I define modernity very simply as that phase of human history where change became compounded upon itself. Basically, things have changed so fast, or the rate of change has reached the point where tradition became invalid as a source of knowledge. It invalidated so many things in our history, right?
So you're basically saying that tradition was a central form of knowledge for most of human history, and it was accurate.
Not only that, it was the most accurate. It was crazy for you not to listen to your elders and not to listen to tradition because things did not. I was actually listening to another video this morning, and the person on the video said something that kind of stuck with me. And I don't know if it's true or not, but it really got me thinking. He said, the world has changed more in the last 50 years than in the last 50,000. Of course, it's talking about our social world. I don't know if it's true, but it's very provocative. If you think about the idea that for as long as we have recorded history, for example, if you wanted to get from a place to a place, you ride an animal, right? And then 150 years ago or so, we're still perfecting we're still perfecting the car because we used to it used to be something. We're still innovating.
So how old is modern humanity? Would you say? Was it about 3 million years?
I would say Homo erectus 1.8, 1.9 million years, right?
Okay, so we've been around 1.8 million years. The amount of time between the first flight and man reaching the moon was 66 years.
Think of think of the disorientation that someone had. My grandfather was born in the late 19th century, right? When he was born, we did not know, like we hadn't really had sustained flight. By the time he died, we'd gone to the moon. I mean, it's astounding. And I think it's like the whiplash, a lot of our attitudes towards modernity, even our attitudes towards, tradition, like the fact that, we want to still preserve tradition, etc. A lot of that is whiplash. And I think that even though, there are certain, traditional attitudes which are harmful to people, and we have to talk about that. But at the same time, I think we have to be at least understanding that this whiplash is understandable given the degree of change that we've been subjected to.
So you're talking about this attitude of optimism versus pessimism towards the future, and I'm really curious, when we look at the Muslim community specifically, how that comes to be, because we have an atmosphere of extreme pessimism, which basically people relate directly to religion. They basically say this is what Islam teaches, and the longer you should expect that the end of the world is around the corner and any day could be humanity's last, etc., etc., and every generation is worse than the one before.
I mean, I was having a conversation with a friend of mine recently. We were in a coffee shop, and out of the blue, the coffee shop basically is mostly staffed by Arabs, and out of the blue, the question came up is when are we going to liberate Palestine, right? Which is a weird question to ask out randomly, right? But basically, it was more like a public poll, right? And I said 20 years. I said, in 20 years, 25 years, we're going to be in a good position. And then the person, the person who's working at the place, he comes back is like, no, it's going to be at the day of judgment. And of course, for him, it's basically stories about the day of judgment, etc. And it's a fascinating topic. And for some reason, I don't want to get into it now because I feel like we're going to dive down a rabbit hole. But it might be interesting to come back to it because I think I have a renewed understanding of what it means when our scripture, when the Quran says akhirah, which means the last or final. I think it's a horizon, not a specific time, but a horizon. But yeah, I mean, I'm gonna stop here.
Yeah.
On that topic.
But I don't think it's particularly healthy for a community to be too pessimistic about the future. And I think it's particularly bad when you have activists who are basically the people who are trying to build the future, trying to push humanity in the direction of improvement and progress, who they're becoming cynical about the very prospect of it, or don't even believe that.
Do you think they are?
I think a lot of people, whether they have consciously or unconsciously, have kind of resigned themselves to the fact that the seas are going to boil and climate change is going to kill us all and everything's doomed. I don't get much optimism from the human rights scene these days.
Yeah, you're right, but I think the human rights scene itself is going through a very difficult, maybe even painful transition. If you think about it, the world order has changed, and the way that we have to do our work as activists has to change. But some people are still stuck to old paradigms. But let me completely change the topic.
Okay.
Like we normally do. Tell me about China's growth.
Yeah, so you've been sending me a few links for a while, and I found another one recently, which was a graph of marriage rates, basically showing that they're falling fast. There was another article a couple of weeks ago saying that population growth projections look like they're completely wrong, and the inflection point where population growth turns negative is probably within a few years, before 2030.
I think I read something that says that it actually peaked in 2020 and it's already reduced. It's already decreasing.
Yeah, it's probably too early for all but the most basic statistics, because a lot of stuff happened in COVID. Society's completely changed. So that's possible. There's no people meeting each other to get married and start having babies. Society basically stopped.
Yeah, there's also people. Getting married is taking a bit of a risk on the future, basically taking a bet on the future. And when things are very uncertain, people typically delay the decision a little bit. But that's, you mentioned that I've been sending you links about this because, the orthodoxy in geopolitics, politics in general, is that China is going to overtake the United States and we're going to be we used to live in an American-dominated world and we're going to end up living in a Chinese-dominated world. And I used to call bullshit on that I called bullshit on it for a long time. And I was a lone voice, and it was the idea is that, I'm not being serious. I'm not a serious thinker, because that is the orthodoxy. Books have been written about this, movies have been written about this. It's become kind of the mainstream that, this is definitely going to happen. My own analysis, and without going into a rabbit hole again, is that China has muscles now. That's why China is dangerous now. Like, the Chinese regime is aware of the fact that now it has a relative advantage, and now is its time to flex its muscles, so to speak. But in 20 years, those muscles would be a lot weaker, because there's many things. There are things going for them, but many things also are not. And one of them is, like you mentioned, demographics. They're going to have an aging population. They already have an increasingly aging population. Population is starting to decline. It's going to be the first country in history, I believe, that is going to grow old before it grows rich. And that's going to be, I don't know. Japan, Japan is another story, right? Like, Japan, when you look at there's always this talk about Japan because of its population, etc., overtaking the United States at some point, 1980s, in the 1970s and 1980s, and it didn't happen because of the population plateaued. I think that it's a similar situation with South Korea, because I think South Korea, Taiwan, Japan all have very low fertility rates. So it's not just China.
Which kind of makes sense why a lot of populist leaders are basically obsessed with boosting birth rates. Like, think Viktor Orban in Hungary.
Yeah. Recently, I also saw something similar, but not. It wasn't Hungary. It was also, I think, was it Tucker Carlson?
Not sure, I didn't hear about it.
Or something like that. But basically something about increasing the birth rates, etc. Or maybe someone who's quoting. I don't remember. But it's something about that, obsessing about increasing birth rates and stuff, which I think is. It must suck to think that my people are becoming smaller in number. But then you have to ask, is this about the culture, or is it about, having more people with our genes?
Yeah, I guess it only matters if you think that your people are in some way inherently superior to other people, rather than considering yourself.
I don't think it's really that. I think there is an actual fear of that, our time is drawing to a close, and smaller population means smaller size and smaller space in the world. This is also happening at the same time as the world is kind of equalizing. The world used to be very Western dominated by Western powers generally for a very long time, for 500 years. And now it's kind of equalizing, even though it's gradual, it is unstable, but this is happening. I know this is like, a lot of these people are really basically they're fascists, but I'm just trying to get myself in their shoes to kind of see their fears. Not to say that I agree with it, of course I don't, but I see where it's coming from.
Do you know of any countries that have ever successfully managed to reverse that decline through policy?
No. The only country, I think, not reverse the decline, they could they could reduce the decline. I believe that Denmark is a case in point, because I think was it 1980s or 1990s, the birth rate had dropped to 1. The fertility rate had dropped to 1, which is very, very low. So you need 2.1 to just maintain the population. And they managed to increase it back to 1.6, which is low, but 1.6 is average for Europe, right? However, this has happened mostly due to immigration and migrants having Danish kids, basically. Which is supposed to be a good thing. When immigrants come to your country and have Danish kids, it's supposed to be good, because these kids have Danish, they speak the Danish language, and they have elements of Danish culture, whatever you want to call that culture. Not all of them will, but a lot of them do. But then, the Danish attitude towards refugees now is really rooted in that. It's rooted in the fact that since 1980, or early 1980s, I believe, most of the increase, if not all of the increase in population, has been from either migrants or the children of migrants.
So basically, the only way for them to stave off the thing they fear the most is the thing they fear second most.
I guess. But then this is it reminds me of something I read recently. This idea of genetic supremacy. Have you heard of the Germanic germ theory?
No, tell me about it.
I mean, it's not a theory of germs. This was a theory, I think, that was popular in the 19th century in America that explains American supremacy versus, I mean, this was at the time when America had this theory or this, this ideology, I don't know what you call it, basically called manifest destiny. The idea is that America is destined to rule everything from Atlantic to Pacific. And of course, this comes at the expense of the Native Americans who had to be pushed away or pushed onto reservations. And of course, it needed a justification. So part of that justification was this idea that the reason why the white man, and keep in mind, I mean, we'll come back to whiteness and who invented whiteness, etc., because this is also, it really didn't exist until the discovery of the Americas. But the idea is that the German stock, German DNA basically, has this in their germ, basically in their blood, has this intelligence. And I think they even described it as intelligence sweeping from the east towards the west. It's funny. I mean, we look at it now, but yeah, it's basically supremacist ideas were popular because human ego works that way.
Good riddance is all I can say.
I mean, there's gonna. Unfortunately, I think, history is new human beings making the same mistakes because every new generation is going to have the same, like, fresh new egos, and we are egotistical beings. So
yeah, and instability basically is what comes when some kind of delusional idea like this meets reality, and comes up against like the facts of nature, the facts of demographic maturation, economic decline, etc. It reminds me of the British Empire and how the UK is basically still living off these myths of when it was rich and controlled 3/4 of the world, when in fact it's now just a small island with a reputation as a pretty bad tax haven with awful COVID policy, awful everything policy, to be honest. And it just,
I mean, you're living there. I mean,
yeah, and there's just no sense of perspective. But people think they live in
do you think? I mean, you got a British education. You're born and raised, right? Do you get this from growing up there, that there is this nostalgia about empire and the time when Britain basically ruled the waves and ruled the world?
There is in some sections of the population. You see it when there's backlash in right-wing media when prominent authors release books, like new books about colonial history. Like a lot of people don't want to hear it or don't want to have it taught. It's kind of like the backlash against critical race theory in the US. But I think it mostly reflects in our expectations, because we're used to a certain standard of living, and that standard is declining. Like our health system is being starved of resources and slowly collapsing, for just one example. And successive governments are kind of thinking we can have it all and refusing to make compromises and sacrifice one thing for another. And I don't really see a realization that most of what was built wasn't built on native resources. It was built by plundering the entire wealth of India and expropriating it. That was how the infrastructure of the country was built. And you can't keep living like that because that era's gone.
I mean, going full circle, in the previous episode we spoke about France and the rise of the far right in France, or the extreme far right, so to speak. And I think maybe a similar dynamic is also at play in France. It's kind of like the nationalism of decline, of we used to be ruling the world, we used to be an empire, we used to be the center of the world, and now we're a normal country. And not only are we a normal country, but an increasing number of our own population, our domestic population, are immigrants who used to be, these are the people who used to wash our cars and wash our windows, and now they're,
competing with us.
I mean,
So
I don't know how much of it is that.
Yeah, on that note, I've got to say that I feel like the UK is a lot further along on the journey of coming to terms with these things than France. France is completely in denial. And, in the UK, there are a lot of discussions, radical activists are, organizing to get these things taught. There's, people who write about them get to appear in the media. There's critical thought. In France, all I see is basically outright denial. And you upset the highest levels of the state when you talk about these things. Like the government itself refuses to acknowledge, like Emmanuel Macron is still gaslighting Algerians about what happened and telling Africans to get
Islam
over
is
it.
in crisis, man. You have to remember, Islam is in crisis.
It's basically what you do when
But
you're
I'm gonna hold you to the episode length. We're past 20 minutes, so let's call it here.
See you next time.
Take care, man. Let's see you next
Salam.
time. Salam.
Thanks for listening. To support us, please leave a rating wherever you listen to your podcasts. You can also find the link to our Patreon in the episode description. See you next time.